Cool. So, hello. We are at session number 3 now, and we're going to start to get into penalties. We're going to talk a little bit about how to even observe and like what you're looking for, and then we'll also get into some of the actual penalty families. It'll be broken up into 2 different sessions. So this session will go through the like how to look for certain actions, and then a couple of the penalties, and then next session will be the remainder of the penalties. So to get right into it, before we actually start talking about penalties, you need to know what you're looking for. Just like positioning is the key before you try to even start to call anything, understanding how to look for any calls or no calls that you're making should come before you start trying to call anything on the track. So it kind of breaks down into positioning and angles. So much of Derby is based from seeing distinct lines in relation to other players, in relation to the track, passing hips, direction of gameplay, cuts. Seeing it from different angles can be deceiving. Different angles can also skew seeing where contact was made. So you always want to make sure that you're checking in with crewmates to piece things together. Actually, one that came up recently with the league that I'm part of is when you're looking straight down at a skate that maybe the toe stop is on the tape. If you're looking straight down at it, it can look like they're touching over, even if there's not, but that somebody looking from a different angle where they can actually see the sideways of the same action has a clearer picture. So always take your position and your angle into perspective, into account when you're looking for anything. Positioning is the foundation of making any call, so always start there. Your brain also likes to fill in the blank spots when you're missing stuff. If you've ever done any sort of like reading about what your brain does when you're trying to recall facts, and we'll get into a little bit of this when we go into the psychology session, but your brain is wired to fill in blanks in order to keep you safe, right? But it also sometimes gets stuff wrong. So when the brain tries to recall something and encounters missing information, it also fills it in using a combination of prior knowledge, context, and expectations. So this process, sometimes referred to as confabulation, can lead to detailed but inaccurate memories. We'll dive deeper into it, like I said, in the psychology session, but the brain does interesting things to make sense of the flood of information being presented, especially with a full contact at speed sport. It's important to ensure that you have all of the info and possibly replay it back in your head to consider the pieces you may have missed or didn't catch the first time you saw it. And then change your positioning as needed. As you come across instances of knowing you didn't have the full picture, consider if a change of position would be beneficial. When I see an action that I didn't catch all of the details for, I also look to check with crewmates to see if they had a better angle or view. And if the answer is nobody saw it, then it might be time to talk about changing positioning a little to ensure that your crew has full coverage of the track. And this can change as the game goes on multiple times. You might do this a bunch of times throughout a game. And then being in line to see if a hit came from, the picture. So using the purple jammer as an example, there's a bunch of different things happening in this photo. Being in line to see if the hit from the white blocker was going Derby direction. There's eyes on the wheels to see if the jammer steps out of bounds at any point while they're moving across the line. Also, if they ended up passing anyone because of it. So it can be hard to see a line straight down, like I was saying before. So the perspective that we have might be much more clear to see that they didn't actually step out than maybe that official who's right there and looking straight down at it. So with any action in Derby, there's a bunch of different things to be looking at, and you should all be working as a crew together to build those different pieces needed to make a call or a no call. So you also need information from the full action. Each action has at least 3 main parts: what happened leading up to the action itself, and then the result of the action. All 3 pieces are needed for any call or no call that is made. Again, collaborating with crewmates to build the full story. That's why it's so important to ensure that all officials are not looking at the same thing. You want to be able to ask a crewmate what they saw, and hopefully it isn't the same exact thing that you did, or else why are there 7 of you? You should each kind of own your zone a little bit so you can build the pieces together. In this photo, you can see the jam ref looks and watches the initiator to see if the initiator goes back during the run back before they call this cut. So they weren't only looking at their jammer to see if the jammer was going to come back in or not, they were also keeping an eye on the initiator, because if that initiator had gone out, then that jammer would not have gotten a cut. So keeping an eye on all of the different moving pieces from the full action from start to finish. Penalty metrics, boiling it down, it mostly comes down to gain, loss, advantage, safety, and sporting conduct. We'll go through how this translates across the different penalty families. In this photo, did they stay in bounds? Were those blockers out of play? Was there a no pack? If so, was the slowing down of the jammer sufficient reasoning for penalizing? Or do we consider that the jammer was still able to finish the trip so there wasn't enough impact to make a call? There's a lot of things that you kind of gotta ask and like make sure that you have all the details correct and to take into consideration through any single action. It's not a trick question. We don't know all of the details here, but this is what it's helpful to think through. The more you do it, the faster that this translation can become. It's important to go back and do a footage review to make sure that you are speeding up the process and not just running from assumption, which nicely leads into impact. So impact exists within the information from full action and penalty metrics. I felt it was worth pointing out as a foundational piece of this to consider. If there isn't impact, what are we seeing? If there is impact, what's the appropriate action to take as to not double penalize for a single action? So in this photo, we see a blue blocker go down, the one in the back here. We see this blue blocker go down, possibly making contact to the white jammer on their way down. We see blue 99 move toward the inside line and send white jammer out of bounds. Blue jammer drives white 810 with their shoulder at one point. Blue 99 hits the white, blue 99 white blue jammer forward. Sorry, I messed up my own notes here. All of this to say there's a lot of different things happening in this one instance. So this person goes down, someone gets knocked out of bound, this blue blocker who moves across, you need to make sure that they're moving in derby direction. A lot of things are all happening at once. It's important to see what the impact on the overall game was, and that gets into the accordion view. I think I might have mentioned in a previous session where you're zooming in on an action to see what exactly is going on, and then once you can declare something should or shouldn't be called, zoom back out to take the bigger picture, to see the full action, to see anything else that's going on, and you kind of get into this like, all right, let me zoom out and see where I need to triage next. What's going on over here? Okay, you zoom out, and then what's going on over here, and it's kind of this accordion soft gaze focused look sort of action that you get into. It's really helpful in instances like this, so you're not just staring at this one person who went down and you're thinking about that, not realizing that like there wasn't really impact on anybody else through that action. There's plenty of times where an illegal action isn't penalizable because it didn't have enough impact on the game. So we'll talk a little bit about positioning per penalty. Some positioning was covered in the previous sessions. We'll also dive deeper into when we cover full details of the rest of the penalties. Any questions before we start getting into it here? Any questions about the positioning info from the full action, penalty metrics, or impact? I'm going to be stopping like each little section here so that we can work through it, make sure that we're all on the same page before getting into like nitty gritty details. If not, then this is what we were talking about before. In order to see full action, there's at least 3 main parts: the beginning, the middle, and the end. You need to have information across all 3 in order to make a decision on what to do. So this could be seeing the full action yourself or piecing together multiple people's perspective to cover all 3. We'll break down some details that of each section and pause along the way to see if any clarifications are needed or to ask any answer any questions that folks may have. So first part of the beginning of the action. What happened directly before the action and contact? Did the person have enough time to react or respond in order to avoid it? Was it an illegal action that resulted in a domino effect, causing a second illegal action? Was officiating communication present? Was it clear? Was it necessary? There's a lot of things that you need to know happened right before the action to say whether that action ended up being legal or not. And then who is the initiator? Was it a dual initiation? Penalized actions should have a clear initiator. Sometimes players initiate simultaneously and they have dual impact on one another. So say that 2 people skate directly into each other and they both, through their own accord, clip each other's skates and they both go down. Both of them made illegal contact. Both of them went down and had an impact on each other. Dual initiation, dual impact, no call. And then were there any circumstances to consider? Did another penalty cause what happened? If a penalty-worthy action caused another illegal thing to happen, you can't issue an additional penalty because it was the result of a different penalty. Was there time for the player to adjust and avoid? So one that comes up a lot is back blocks. If a jammer is coming full speed, they have a very set trajectory, and then a blocker at the very last second moves in front of them with their back. That blocker becomes the initiator, and it's not on the jammer to be issued a penalty in that scenario because the blocker is the initiator there. So just things to take into consideration before you actually start thinking about what you just saw as the main action. Any questions about the beginning portion of stuff before we get into the middle? And you can definitely throw questions in the chat while we're going. You don't have to like wait for the pause or anything. But if not, then let's get into middle. So for the action itself, where did the contact and the action actually happen? This comes down to target zones, blocking zones. We're going to get into that a little bit later. Did it happen in play? Did it happen during the jam, or did it happen out of bounds or after the jam? And then who is involved in the action? Knowing who was involved helps determine legality. Sometimes an illegal action is not a penalty, even if there's impact. If it's a white blocker back blocking another white blocker, that's illegal, but it's the same team, so there's no impact. Sometimes an illegal action doesn't benefit people directly involved in the action, but did it impact a teammate? Or did a non-initiator draw a cut? So for example, if somebody uses their forearm to move an opponent out of the way, but that opponent doesn't go down, they don't go out of bounds, the person who used their forearm doesn't gain position on them, but that action allowed one of their teammates to pass by, like especially the jammer, then that still is impact, even though the gain was not from anybody physically involved in the action. It was an illegal action that caused a teammate to gain benefit. And then the non-initiator cut thing, even if the person who initiates and hits someone out of bounds, if a non-initiator has superior position and runs them back, that person who is out of bounds does still need to come in behind the non-initiator, even though the non-initiator was not part of the initial action. So just another, you need to take more people into consideration than just the people directly involved in the action. And then any other circumstances to consider. Some penalties have different metrics for the sake of safety, like striking with the point of the knee or elbow, or back blocks or high blocks. It doesn't always need to have a loss of gain or position because those can be called as penalties because of safety. Sometimes the result of an action was due to something outside of normal gameplay. For example, I wouldn't issue a reckless entry to the penalty box if there was a puddle directly in front of the box that the skater slid into. That was outside of their control. That shouldn't have been there. I'm not going to fault them for that. Any questions on middle portion or the direct action portion of what you're observing? Cool. And then what happens afterwards? If it was illegal, was it also penalty worthy? So not all actions are illegal and penalty worthy. For example, bubbling back, or if you're not familiar with that, if somebody who's pushing on a tripod skates back of their own accord and then that tripod follows them back, that can be called bubbling back. It can seem like maybe it's a direction penalty, like that tripod is pushing that person back. So you really got to be clear. Is that person being pushed back, or are they moving back on their own and they're just being followed back? And then tracking, a lot of times people kind of use their arms as antennae to feel what's going on around them. It's technically always illegal to be using your forearms, but it's not penalty worthy until they actually do something with it that causes a gain or a loss of position, And then the impact that it had. Gauge the impact it had not only on those involved, but also teammates, like we were talking about earlier. For example, direction that does not cause a gain or loss of position for those involved, but it does allow a teammate to get by due to the contact. That's kind of similar to the example from before. If you're driving directly into someone's back, but there's no loss or gain of position, might not be a back block. But if there is a gain of position on a different opponent, so if I am pushing directly into someone's back and driving them forward, and I'm not gaining position, I'm not passing anybody, and it's not a safety concern, not necessarily a penalty, but if me pushing on their back allows me to pass one of their teammates, then there is impact. Even though I didn't gain advantage on this person, I gained advantage on a different opponent. Did both players initiate equally on each other? Kind of like the low block example that I gave earlier. If they were both initiators and they both had the same outcome from it, probably not penalizable. However, in that same example that I gave before, if two people are skating and they both skate into each other's skates and they both go down, was one of them skating opposite of derby direction? Because then that kind of changes things. That means that one of those players was doing something outside of the normal how to play roller derby. Roller derby is supposed to be played in derby direction. So if two skaters skate directly into each other's skates and they both go down, but one of them was skating opposite derby direction, then I would call a penalty on that person because they were doing something outside of the rules of the game, even though they both went down. Again, any other circumstances to consider? Some penalties do not need to have impact in the moment, but if it becomes a habitual action that is causing an unsafe game, that can be penalized. Also, cutting the track short amount of distances can become a habitual thing. Like if a jammer, as they're going around the track on the opposite side from the pack, cuts the inside line just a little bit, they're technically not cutting anybody. The adopting an out of bounds position didn't really have impact because there's nobody around them, but they are shortening their distance to the track. Not necessarily penalizable for a one-time kind of thing, but if it starts to become habitual throughout the game, if you start to see it 3 times or more, then you can actually penalize that for it being a thing that they're doing over and over again. Do some actions later in the game have the same impact spectrum? Sometimes skaters being tired makes them less stable, so big hits may not actually be big hits. They're the same power of hit, but everybody's just a little bit more tired. So you kind of got to take into consideration, is that person going down from that hit, or are they going down because they're tired? A little bit different than the start of a game. Sometimes you might hear the actions in the game called chippy, like it's getting a little chippy out there. It's an adrenaline running high sort of game, and you might start seeing retaliatory hits that might benefit from de-escalation. So you can talk to the coaches and say that we're starting to drift into some safety concerns here. So if we see this to continue, we're going to start issuing penalties. So something that originally we didn't call it right out the gate, but it's starting to become a more and more of a safety concern, then you can actually start calling it. Some teams have the mental strategy of delivering hits even if they're not directly beneficial to what's happening on the track. So say it's a power jam, one of the jammers is on the complete other side of the track. There's nothing really happening in the pack. Some teams will start hitting opponents out of bounds regardless, as sort of a mental thing, like this sense of no matter what's going on, you always got to stay engaged. You always got to be alert, aware of what's going on around you. It's sort of like a mental sort of game. Other times you'll see it start to develop through a game, and I think that is something that you can consider too. If you're starting to see that sort of thing come up through a game, from a game getting more and more sort of intense, that's a little bit different than a team who is doing it consistently through the whole game. And you need to start thinking about, is there a safety concern here or not? Any questions on any of this? Beginning, middle, end result of observing actions. We're going to start getting into penalty metrics right after this. Penalty metrics it is. So gaining and maintaining position. A gain of position or a teammate's gain of position. Did they go down, out? Was there a change of speed or trajectory? So when it's mentioned, did they gain or did they maintain position? That's what we're talking about. Safety, if actions are dangerous because contact is not expected in legal gameplay, like I was saying before, the direction call, it's not expected that people are moving opposite derby direction. It's not within the written rules. Forceful contact to or with certain target or blocking zones. Avoidable forceful contact to the back or forceful contact to the head or neck should be penalized regardless of impact. Somebody doesn't need to go out of bounds or down, or the gain or maintain a position item from before. There's also a safety aspect. So certain ones like the forceful contact to the back or head don't need such strict loss of position to be called because of safety. Contact to down skaters, same sort of deal. There doesn't need to be further impact on them. It's just, did that person have an opportunity to not skate into that down skater or not? Yes or no. Some safety calls are incidental, striking with the point of the knee or the point of the elbow. Even if they're done on accident, it's still not allowed in the game. Now, if it is done intentionally, like very obviously intentionally, then you're maybe getting into expulsion sort of conversations. But even if they're not meaning to do it, one that I see come up a lot is jammers who are pushing on a wall and they're trying to run. And as they're running, they're kicking up underneath the backs of the legs of the wall that they're pushing against. You can't be striking with the tips of your knees there. So that can be penalized even, again, if there isn't a loss of position. This also covers the other end of the spectrum to the extreme of intentional punching, kicking, tripping. Like I was saying before, if you're starting to see some intentional things, and that gets into a whole different category. Intention starts getting into expulsions. Sufficiently dangerous or unsporting as to remove the individual from the game for that action alone. Even if it is not seemingly intentional, it can be considered negligent and or reckless, and those actions should be considered for expulsion independent of their impact. So even if it didn't seem like it was intentional that the skater did this, if that skater is so exhausted from the game that they are literally like throwing their body into other people, going the wrong direction, that can warrant getting into expulsion conversations, because it might be deemed that that skater is no longer safe to continue playing. So a lot of times when I've heard discussions around expulsions happen, what I hear so many times is, well, I didn't do it on purpose. That's not always the most important part of it. There's also these other things to take into consideration too. And then fairness, gaining advantage outside of legal play or if it's not expected. So directions, I've mentioned a few times, direction penalties are because you're not going in derby direction. Multiplayers, you're supposed to be using legal contact and blocking zones, and those links are outside of legal play. Illegal starting positions, you as a blocker can't start where the jammers start. Taking a downed or out of bounds position or skating out of bounds to avoid a block is not allowed. So there's things that aren't necessarily a gain or loss of position, but it comes down to the fairness of the game. Another one is initiation from blockers who are out of play, or they're down, or they're out of bounds. You can't be down on a knee and continuing to block. You can't be out of bounds and continuing to block. Even if you're not causing anybody to lose position, that's still a safety portion of the penalty calls. Game flow, actions that interfere with the game. So illegal call-offs is an example of that. If you are not the lead jammer and your jam ref is not pointing or signaling that you are the lead jammer and you successfully call off the game, again, there isn't like a loss of position at all, but it comes down to you're messing with the game flow of the game. You weren't supposed to be able to call off that jam. If you're preventing the jam from starting, from having no blockers fielded in the correct area at the jam start, or if you're not fielding a jammer, or if skaters who are in the penalty box queue are not lined up for the following jam, those are all things that can prevent the next jam from starting and can be penalized. Team timeouts, when a team doesn't have any remaining, or if someone who is not wearing the C or the A successfully calls a timeout, falls under game flow penalties. Having too many bench staff, or bench staff themselves interrupting the game, like going fully into the penalty box and communicating with the skater, or running out onto the middle of the track during the jam. Those come into interference, game flow sort of penalties. Now, anytime you're thinking that something might be penalty worthy, you always need to consider, is it reasonable to think that there could be confusion or miscommunication? So if a skater has reason to believe that they are legally positioned, even though they're not, or if they have reason to believe that they cannot legally return to a legal position, they must be warned before being assessed a penalty for failing to return. Some examples: leaving the track thinking that you have a penalty. So false starts fall into this a lot. When there's a false start warning called, you'll see the skaters start to go to the box. They believe that they are doing what they are supposed to be doing. They believe that they are supposed to be going to the box. So I would not issue a skating out of bounds penalty on them because they thought that what they were doing was legal. If you're not leaving the track when a penalty was called because an incorrect verbal cue was given, so if the verbal cue that's being given is purple 2-5, but your number is actually purple 2-0-5, you technically don't have to leave. You can't be assessed an additional penalty for that. I will say, if you play, you should still leave, because all you're really doing is extending the amount of time that you're being penalized, but you can't give an additional penalty if the verbal cue was incorrect. Contact during a no pack before the no pack warning is delivered. If there's blocking out of play happening because there's not a pack formed, but the no pack was not issued by the officials yet, you cannot penalize that. I will note that that is different than out of play. Out of play, you should give a warning, but it is not necessary to give a warning for out of play contact for being outside of the engagement zone. That's more than 20 feet away from the pack. The general idea is a skater should understand that they are that far away from the pack, versus no packs can get really tricky, especially with like split packs and things, and it's only 10 feet. No packs have to give a warning before issuing that illegal contact penalty. Out of plays, you should give the warning as soon as you can, but you don't have to if there is illegal contact that happens outside of the engagement zone. All right. Any questions on any of this stuff? Even if your question is, you said this word or this phrase or whatever that I'm not familiar with, that is totally fine too. I know I'm just kind of throwing a whole bunch of words out here. All right, we'll get into the penalties themselves. I will throw the link to this into the chat. So these are the penalties as listed within WFTDA documentation. Note that there is a hierarchy of calls, and if multiple illegal things are done at the same time, you should sort of think about what is the more pressing issue that is happening in that instance. So if someone is using their forearm and making contact to someone's head, a high block penalty is seen as higher on the hierarchy than a forearm penalty. Either one could be called and it would be just fine. But if you really have to nail down like what it should be, the high block is the bigger pressing concern in the game. So just call what you see. And then if you need to go and edit the paperwork afterwards and say, you know what, change that forearm into a high block, that is totally fine. The bigger, more important thing is getting that person off the track as soon as you can. So don't worry about thinking about which one should I call right now. Just call one and then fix it later if you need to. All right, so target and blocking zone penalties. The penalties that go to an illegal target zone are the back block. That is just kind of a forward push motion. The high block, which is kind of like a face mask from football, I think, signal. And then low block, I kind of think of it as an L shape to remember that is L for low block. Those are all for illegal target zone penalties. Penalties with an illegal blocking zone: head block, tap the back of your head. Forearm, touch your forearm. And leg block, which is sort of a sweeping motion to your leg. The way that I remember it is it was your freaking leg. It was your leg that did the thing. That's just how I remember it. Your mileage may vary. Whatever helps you, whatever mnemonics help you remember what the things are, you know. All right, we'll dive deeper a little bit into these. So first, we'll get into illegal target zone penalties. Target zone is the portion of the body you're legally allowed to initiate, make contact with, deliver a hit, drive. You can see it as the pink color on the silhouette. These are the areas that you can legally make contact with on an opponent. Special call out to the forceful contact to the back, head, neck, penalized regardless of impact for safety reasons portion of the rules. We kind of mentioned that earlier. Even if there is an impact, if it was contact, the forceful contact to the back, head, neck, it's still penalizable. And then note at the bottom of the rule, suddenly presenting an illegal target zone without allowing the opponent to reasonably have an opportunity to avoid the illegal contact makes that person the initiator. This is what I was talking about earlier. If a jammer has a set trajectory and speed, and then someone at the very last moment moves in front of them with their back, and then that person makes contact with the back, that person did not have a reasonable opportunity to not hit that person in the back. The person who moved into their trajectory is the initiator, so there's no call there. Illegal target zone penalties. I already did the hand signals here. This was supposed to be to go over the hand signals, but I already did those. Let's see some examples. So, top photo. Even though the jammer slides their hip contact across the left side of the blocker, there was still contact with the upper body that caused that person to go down. So you can kind of see in the top photo, black 3-6. Their hips might look sort of legal as hitting the blue blocker on the side, but their upper body shoulder hits in the center of the back. So that's an important thing to note for watching for back blocks. You don't only want to watch for the hips, you want to watch what the arms and shoulders are doing too. A lot of times people come into hits like this or even with their arms out, and if that portion is making contact with somebody's back, that's important to take into consideration too. And then on the bottom, this likely could have been a forearm or a back block, but like we said earlier, back block is likely the one that got called because of the hierarchy. You can see the white jammer on the outside line just kind of pushes that person with their forearm straight out, but it was also in their back. So could have been a forearm, could have been a back block, likely going to be called a back block. Any questions on back blocks before we get into high blocks? Cool, high blocks it is. So in the top photo, black 1-3, the blocker closest to the outside line, throws their shoulder and making contact to the white jammer's head/neck, causing them to go down, but it would have been a high block even if that person did not go down. So you can see up there the kind of shoulder check into the white jammer's head-neck area. So definitely a high block even if that person had not gone down, still would have been a high block for making contact to their face. Bottom photo, white 2-4 swings their left arm back unknowingly, and they make contact to the black jammer's head. So you can kind of see in the scrum, One of the blockers, as they're spinning, just kind of throws an arm and it makes contact to the jammer's face right there. So again, that's an example of that jammer did not go down or out of bounds, but it was still contact to someone's face, still penalizable. Another example. So high blocks are especially important to look for during star passes. So there was a potential high block due to this jammer laying their arm on the black blocker with gold helmet on their head. You can see as they're passing it, they're kind of on that person's head. So this is another example of why it's important to make sure that your crew is delegating where people's eyes are. So you need to make sure that someone has eyes on the legality of the handoff. It wasn't thrown, it wasn't dropped, it was an actual handoff. That the jammer and the pivot were both in bounds and upright during the pass, that no illegal contact happened to prevent the pass. If somebody is pushing that jammer backwards as they're trying to pass it off, or if somebody is swatting the jammer's hand while they're trying to pass it off, looking for illegal contact like that, that prevents the pass. So important to talk about this with the crew on who's going to have eyes on what across the different moments. Like when a pack is closer to the inside line or the outside line, who has their eyes up or down. These are the sorts of things that it's important for a crew to go over. All right, perfect timing, because now we got space for high block questions. What you got, Andy?
So going back to that first clip where it's very much a shoulder/forearm straight to the head, would that one constitute an expulsion? Because it looks violent and very intentional in aim.
You know, having not been part of the rest of this game, that makes it a little bit more difficult to think through. And this is a slowed down clip. At speed, this could look very different, you know? I don't think it's a hard yes or no either way. I think if I'm that black team's coach, you could make the justification of like, hey, I don't see a reality where the aim of that white blocker's shoulder would have hit anything other than our jammer in the face. And then it's up to the crew to determine, like, was it just the speed of the game and the person threw his shoulder where they were in that moment? It was just kind of like the game being the game. Or has there been this sort of trend of high contact happening? There's already been warnings given. So there's more things to take into consideration with it. So I can't really give you a solid answer, but possibly.
It's mostly with that top one, though.
Yeah.
And I think the angle of watching also doesn't do this one service.
Yeah. It's always difficult / impossible to call things from photos, but even with moving things, especially when they're slowed down, it can be really difficult, like you said, from the perspective and what else was going on in the game. But yeah, I could see that being chatted about for sure.
That's more like a official review on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think it needs to necessarily be an official review. If you and I were on that crew in that game and you had that same thought, you could bring it in. We could even take a timeout if need be to be like, hey, here's what I saw. What did everybody else see? Do we collectively think that this rises to having a conversation about expulsions or not? It could also be an official review if the black coach feels like the crew should talk about that.
Understood.
Cool. Any other questions about high blocks? All right. Low blocks. So this one kind of has a few different things going on. We can discuss different pieces of legality here. Did that person fall small? Were they still in the act of falling or sliding, even if they were small? Even if it's not a low block on the black blocker who goes down first, was it a low block on the black jammer who could have, again, angles here make it a little bit more difficult, but maybe that black jammer made contact with that white blocker who went down. It looks like white 8-5. So there's a few different things to talk about here of like, who was the initiator here? Did a person meet the metrics of falling small and being a no call or not? It looks like the low block was issued to the black blocker, and I would assume it's because they kept sliding or moving. So this comes up a lot. But I fell small. Even if you fall small, if you sort of hockey puck slide into somebody, you can still be called on a low block. The I fell small, therefore it's a no call is if you are not moving, you fell small, you're trying to be safe in the situation, and then somebody makes contact with you, that's the no call scenario. Any questions on low blocks? Cool. All right, let's get into illegal blocking zone penalties. So blocking zone is the portion of the body you are legally allowed to use to make contact, deliver a hit and drive. What portions of your body you can use to make contact with others. So again, the pink portions of the silhouette. The rule lists the metrics we outlined previously: significantly off balance, change of trajectory or speed, including holding somebody back. You might hear things called like impeding forearms. Illegally maintaining position, holding on to an opponent in order to not go out of bounds, like holding yourself upright using an opponent. Special call out to the forceful contact to the back, head, neck, penalized regardless of impact for safety reasons. Once again, safety notes as previously mentioned, forceful contact initiated with the head or neck or positionally blocking with the head or neck. So that is an example. One example of that, if you are only presenting the opponent with your head, if you are skating into a wall of people head first, those players don't have an opportunity to block you in any way other than making contact with your head. So even if you don't actually make contact with your head, you can be penalized for positionally blocking with your head. Note at the bottom of the rule, forearms tucked against your body are considered legal, but that can change very quickly. So we discussed earlier, you can't use your forearm to change somebody's position, but if your forearms are tucked against your body, they are considered one with your body. A lot of what you see with these sorts of hits is the like trail off from a hit. Sometimes that can just be the momentum of your body throwing your arm forward. Sometimes that can be I'm pushing you with my arms regardless of what the rest of my body is doing. A lot of the times it's both. And you got to discern as an official, would that person have gone down, gone out of bounds, lost position in some way, even if they did or didn't use those arms? If the answer is no, that person probably wouldn't have gone down without the skater doing that with their arms, then it seems penalizable. Always makes me cringe when skaters go head first. Yeah. And that a lot of the times comes up as the game goes on, as again, players start to get a little bit more tired and they start to lean a little bit further into their skating. Yeah, it's not fun to watch. I would definitely give warnings if I start seeing that. I wouldn't wait until we're getting into penalty territory. If I see skaters starting to pitch forward a little bit, I would bring that to the teams so that we can avoid even getting into that realm. All right. So we already went over the hand signals here. Head block, touch the back of your head, forearm, touch your forearm, leg block. It's your freaking leg. Okay, so in this photo, if the red jammer continued to push the green pivot with their face and head, it could be a head block, as the red jammer would be an initiator. So I see these fairly often too. Maybe the initial contact, the initial drive is with your shoulder, but then as you're continuing to push and push, you start to lean your head into the contact a little bit more, and then you actually start pushing with your head, or maybe even with both. You're kind of pushing with the angle of your neck. You also cannot do that. If the green pivot made contact to the red jammer's head in this way, and that's how they got into this scenario, then the green pivot may have been the initiator of a high block. So when there's contact with someone's head, you always need to be able to discern, did the person place their head there, or did someone make contact with that person's head? Any high block questions? Cool, everybody's favorite, forearms. So in the top photo, the white jammer uses their left arm to hook onto a black blocker, keeping themselves in bounds and preventing the black blocker from sending them out of bounds. So it happens sort of quick there, but right there, right before they start dancing on the line, you can see the white jammer's arm just kind of hangs out and hangs onto a black blocker. And it seems like the officials in this crew determined that white jammer likely could not have stayed in bounds had they not done that. So they were issued a forearm for maintaining upright or inbounds position, using an opponent grabbing onto them with their forearms. In the bottom photo, the white jammer uses sort of a swimming motion, and it's deemed as an impeding forearm. It's mostly the left arm. It contacts slide from the upper arm past the elbow. So you can see when they do this to get through the blockers, that left arm, it starts here, which is fine. But as they start to expand, the contact with that blocker creeps out past the elbow and onto their forearm as they complete the motion. So that was deemed as that person likely couldn't have made it past those players having not done that motion. I know these are kind of tricky ones. Any questions on either of these? See a lot of newer jammers swimming. You can take out the word newer and you can say, see a lot of jammers swimming. But yeah, totally. All right, here's another example. So Black 1-9, they technically used their forearm to move the red jammer, but was there impact? So this looks like that red jammer was able to get past Black 1-9, was able to complete the scoring trip or their initial trip or whatever it was. So even though, an illegal thing happened, it didn't really change the outcome of what happened. So I would call that as a no call. It's illegal, but not penalty worthy. Any questions on forearms?
I have a question about that last one. So you wouldn't call a penalty for that, but like, wouldn't it technically have slowed the jammer down from getting out of the pack? So technically that would impede play?
Yeah, that is also correct. I think the other pieces, I think there's a casebook entry. It's more specifically about back blocks. And I think if I remember right, the scenario is the jammer pushes on somebody's back and that person loses position, but the jammer never gains anything from it, and they allow that person to come back. They technically moved that person out of the line and like changed that team's setup, but because it didn't have overall impact, the jammer didn't really go anywhere else. It's deemed as no impact. And there's another one that is technically an action slowed the jammer down, but overall that jammer was able to successfully get through and finish their trip. So even if it slightly slowed them down for that moment, it didn't really have overarching impact. Nobody else was able to gain advantage because of it. You could make the case that like they would have finished that trip half of a second sooner, but those aren't considered impactful enough to penalize, if that makes sense. Now, if it had slowed them down and it allowed this black blocker on the outside to run up on the outside line and get in front of them again, then yes, totally, because that jammer would have been able to leave had that forearm not happened. But because they were able to kind of still go along their way and do what they were originally planned on doing, deemed as a no call. Does that help?
Yep. Thank you.
Leg blocks. So in the bottom photo, maybe one of the more wacky examples of this, the kind of roundhouse kick by accident, this green jammer, they made contact using a portion of their body below mid-thigh. In the top photo, that person is more impeding. They're not causing a loss of position, but they're preventing that jammer from continuing to move forward. Again, they're using below mid-thigh to hold a block against that jammer. So that's leg blocks. Any questions about leg blocks? I hear leg blocks and low blocks get confused pretty often. And the difference is just, did you make contact below mid-thigh and cause a loss of position? Or did you use your below mid-thigh to cause or lose position? Did you hit with or did you hit them? Difference between the target zone and blocking zone. Well, that's all the penalties. We can circle back. Does anybody have any questions on any of the penalties that we covered today, or the metrics on how to observe or use discretion about penalties? Anything at all that we covered? Anything that you've seen recently, had questions about while watching?
Could you just go over the difference between the leg block and the low block again? Because I don't quite understand the difference.
Yeah, so it mainly comes down to, let me go back to the target zone, blocking zone page. So it's the difference between a target zone and a blocking zone. So blocking zone, I can technically use my own back to block somebody, but a target zone, I can't hit somebody in the back. Kind of the same thing with leg block versus low block. I can't block somebody with below my mid-thigh, and I also can't make contact to someone below mid-thigh. So it's what I'm using versus what I'm hitting. Does that help differentiate it?
Yeah, I got it.
At conflict. So just drop it in. Share, hello. So share, well, what we covered was back blocks, high blocks, low blocks, head blocks, forearms, and leg blocks. Any questions about any of those? We also covered the metrics of, music, of what to look for when you're calling penalties, like the beginning of the action itself, and the end of the action. So if you have any questions at all on the thought process around making a call or not making a call, or any of those penalties that I mentioned, feel free to ask. Or if you're just like, I don't know, forearms escape me, can we chat about those for a little bit, 1 sec? Okay. Poisonous versus venomous. I love it. Yes, perfect. Totally. Yeah, that's really real. Some things that I have found helpful is to look for the little nuancing things. You can see when someone is like flexing a muscle, tensing a muscle. You can see when there's like pressure being applied to a jersey or something. You can see like wrinkles in the material. So there's those little things like that where you can see, I can tell that there's force being applied somewhere. Does that have any relation to what I'm observing happen here or not? And that's why I find it really helpful to warm up. I mean, that might sound ridiculous, but it's really important to warm up before a game. Too often I show up and see that like officials are just kind of hanging out and then they pop up and go into the game with no prep at all. It's really helpful to just, even if you're only doing laps, and especially when the teams are warming up, just watch and observe the contact that's being made, observe the bodies in motion, and it really helps with like clicking into those little things that you look for when making those kind of calls. You gotta warm up the things that you're looking at just as much as you gotta warm up your muscles that you're skating with. Yep. Yeah.
Going back to forearms, I'm just remembering a conversation I had with Labrat on Saturday. When it comes to leading with the forearms, it once again it goes back to intent, but when you lead with forearm, if the arm crumples back in and becomes part of your chest, it's more of a no call than if it stays extended. And just remembering that conversation, because I did at the game on Saturday, I did see a player lead with their forearms a couple times.
So you're saying sort of skating around like this?
When they're about to initiate contact, they had their forearm a bit extended, and that was the first contact made with the opposing player. But I just don't remember if it stayed extended or it came into the body. But Labrat explained that to me with if the forearm stays extended, penalty, and especially if it impacts the game, and if it comes into the body, then it's more of a no call.
Yeah, you'll see. I think it's really fun to watch this sort of thing at really high levels of gameplay because there's arms everywhere. We talked about tracking a little bit earlier. Everybody's just kind of using arms as a 10-eye of like what's going on around me. And the forearms are usually the first thing to touch always. So you need to determine when are they actually starting to apply force or not. So yeah, that's totally accurate.
All right, thank you.
And yeah, we talked about earlier too, like if it's against your body, it's considered your body, not your forearm. So you can totally make contact with somebody and kind of crumple, like you were saying, crumple into, now I'm actually blocking you here, and that's totally fine. When we use the term swimming, is that just jammers using their forearms to break walls and squeeze between walls, or does that also cover illegal assists they're taking? So when I've heard the term swimming used, I think it comes down to two main actions that I see. It's either I'm putting my arms through first and like forcing my way between two people, or I'm like chopping through two people to wedge myself in between. I've seen both of those actions kind of called swimming. And it really comes down to whether you're using this part of your arm, your forearm, from elbow to fingertip, or if you're using this part of your arm. If you're using from shoulder to elbow, well, to just before elbow, that's totally fine. So if you are like coming through with that first, I mean, obviously you can't be striking with the tip of your elbow to do that, but that's what you really got to look for is are they pushing aside or pushing through with the legal part of their arm, or are they doing it with their forearm portion of their arm? Illegal assists, I might not fully understand what you're saying there. If it's easier to unmute and kind of talk through it. Grabbing another person's jersey. Oh, that's just a forearm for keeping yourself upright or in bounds. We actually had an example of that. So on that top photo, the white jammer's left arm kind of hooks onto a black blocker, and it was determined by that crew that white jammer likely wouldn't have been able to stay in bounds had they not been sort of clinging onto that black blocker. So keeping yourself upright or in bounds by using your forearm on an opponent is a forearm call for sure. I wouldn't call that swimming. I have not seen that labeled as swimming. That is just using your forearms, holding onto an opponent to keep yourself upright or in bounds. Is it possible to send out these little clips of penalties? I'm having a bit of trouble seeing them since my stream is a little pixelated. Yeah, I've been sending all of these presentations to the Shoreline officials Google Drive, so I believe it could be shared, possibly by someone. Yes. Anything else people have been thinking about, wondering about? in the world of how to look at calls. See, the jammers do a lot of that on the outside wall, but it's a little hard for me to tell right now if it should be a call or not, since I can't tell for sure if they would have gone out of bounds or fallen without the forearm contact they're making. Yeah, that's one of those things that if you can't tell, then it should be a no call. With any calls, if you're not 100%, then it should not be called. Now, if you're not 100% and you're not calling it, you should probably still check in with the rest of your crewmates to see if they have enough other information to make it 100%, you know? And I think that comes down to, I'm not sure if you were here at this point yet, Cher, or not. We were talking, someone had asked about, how do you tell when a pressure is being applied or if an arm is just kind of against somebody? And that just comes down to the practice of watching bodies in motion. There's plenty of practices where I don't call a single thing. I'm just observing what people look like in all different scenarios, in all different levels of gameplay, at all different speeds, at all different kind of strategies, what people look like when they're playing Derby. And the more that you kind of see that and tune into that, the more that the weird things pop out to you, like, oh, that shouldn't be happening through normal motions, you know? So a lot of practice is that too. I think that's a really missed sort of part of practicing as an official. Feel free to keep any other questions that you have coming. Again, please, somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Next one is May 19th, hopefully, and we're going to cover the rest of the penalties that we didn't talk about today. That is still, if you, through your ventures between now and then, see anything else that you have questions regarding anything that we talked about today, feel free to bring it to next class, along with any questions that you might have about the penalties in the actual session. Yeah, that's everything that I had for today. May 19th. All right, 2 for 2. Well, 2 for 3. Thanks, Dad.